Welcome to the Workforce Playbook, a podcast hosted by Everywhere English. We help companies grow by upskilling their international employees through language and cultural training. I'm Kate, and in this podcast, I chat with leaders shaping today's workplace. They are sharing real stories about communication, culture, safety, and performance. What's worked, what hasn't worked, and what they've learned along the way. No hypotheticals, no buzzwords, just honest conversations. Hi, and welcome back to the Workforce Playbook. Today we are joined by Gary Clarke, a leader, an L&D leader in that space for 20 plus years. So, Gary, I will leave you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your role in the last couple of years and the different type of companies and industries that you've worked for.
Thank you very much, Kate. So, my name's Gary. I am currently sat in my house in France, taking a career break. But I've worked in multiple industries over the last 30 plus years. Starting my career in the military and joined straight into the army after school at 16, and became an engineer. And spent a good portion of my time in the military as a mechanical engineer, and then got the bug for teaching and became an educator in the military, which was a great opportunity, and spent 10 or so years doing that. And then there was a sort of position in my life where I could stay in the military till I was 55, or I could do something else. And having joined at 16, I decided to try a few different things. And so I left, worked for myself for a few years, found that a little bit boring, kind of being on your own and not in the sort of company of other people. I probably reverse that these days and prefer my own company. And then I went into corporate with a company called Serco as global learning manager, and then worked my way through to various other roles. So Serco went through then to BlackRock, working with software engineers in BlackRock, largest asset manager in the world. Then to group director of learning at Capita, so one of the biggest BPOs in the UK, along with Serco. And from Capita, I then moved to Hyster-Yale, which is material handling. And then my last role, which I finished about 3 weeks ago, was with Qatar Airways in Doha in Qatar as the group head of learning and development. So, and now I'm taking a bit of time out to enjoy some holiday and refresh, and then think about where I go after that.
Lovely. So extensive experience across military, corporate, finance, aviation, lots and lots of experience over the last couple of years. And from when you kind of started in the L&D space, say the learning and development space, until now, how have you seen it develop, or the evolution of it? How has that changed?
I think overall, in the current climate, there's a big push for, artificial intelligence, and people are talking about AI and everything else, which I totally understand, right? That's something that's on vogue at the moment. But for me, there's still the core fundamentals of what learning and development does, and that's, developing people in the workplace. In terms of the changes, really, technology has been a big change. When I first joined Serco in 2014, I implemented SAP LMS in the organization, and it was an okay system. It was still pretty basic in that point of time. I think technology-wise, companies are moving quicker and quicker now in how they utilize artificial intelligence, or what they sometimes say is artificial intelligence, but maybe not so much. And so technology is the big enabler. But for me, I think learning development always has the same challenges, right? What is the impact of what you're doing in the workplace? That's still the kind of the golden coin, or whatever, golden circle of what are you trying to find. And for me, the change really in terms of how we do things in the organization is ensuring that you're fully aligned to the business, and that's a big thing, particularly for me, when I've worked in multiple different organizations and not being an expert in any of those particular areas, so I'm not an aviation expert, I'm not a material handling expert, etc. I'm not a finance expert. You really have to understand what the business is asking you for. Therefore, you can provide what they're looking to achieve. And so, I think understanding how the business works is important. Um, but I also think it's good to have that not so much knowledge, because you can then ask the questions that maybe not have been asked before. So as a non-aviation expert, you can ask those questions that people might think are silly questions, but actually could be, the opening of a box of something that you go, actually, this is really, really quite interesting. And I think, the key thing for me anyway, in organizations, as we move into this more technological kind of space around L&D, is the people connection.
Mhm.
And I think it's even more so important now that people stay connected as individuals. And we're going to need different skills in the workplace. Just sending emails and whatever else, you're going to have to go and talk to people now, because things like emails and all this stuff is going to be almost automated, and so,
I know. It's weird.
you know, that that connection with that human connection where, you're sending an email to somebody sat 2 seats down from you, is I think we'll need to change, because, as a species, we are built on connection. We're a social species, and I think that's something that will really be pushed to the forefront of corporate life, because a lot of things will just be automated, and built through technology and done through technology, but you will never lose things like creativity, or how to communicate, or leadership, or those kind of softer skills. I know people don't tend to like softer skills, but you know what I mean. It's those human skills, and I
Mhm.
kind of really like the human hybrid type approach of how do we work with humans and how do we work with machines and technology.
Absolutely. And it's funny you say that, because obviously we go into companies and we help the teams um, integrate their workforces. And people always think, oh, it's language. Some companies might even say, should we use Google Translate? We have a translate on our phone. Why do we need um, English training or whatever it might be? And one of our values would be not losing that people connection and the social species, and that it's a
Mm.
cultural. Why do we have translators and why do we have interpreters? That's the question. It's how you perceive something. But are you worried for the world? Do you think it is going? Is it because that we are passionate about what we do, that we are on the more social side, or do you think the world is going to go more,
Um,
more AI, more technology? It is more. Technically, it's probably cheaper. It's probably more
mm.
efficient for a business in terms of time. Um, but it's, I suppose, about measuring that social impact. You know.
I mean, to be honest with you, I'm at the end of my kind of working life almost now, and I think I'll be long gone by the time we've got robots in the workplace. I'm hoping,
Yeah.
but I
I
think
hope.
I do worry for younger people, for the
Mm.
younger generation that are coming out of universities with degrees in certain things that will maybe never be used in the workplace, and so. I think there's going to be a massive cultural shift. The younger generation tend to be more jumpy around. They tend to go
Yeah.
from company to company rather than in the old days where somebody would be at a company for like 30 years. That was the norm, that you never moved companies. And I think that's a big shift. And I think the younger generation coming through will need to find their niche in this current world of human hybrid and how that all connects together. And that's my big worry. I think you know how do the younger generation really connect in the workplace? How do they find their way, and how do they build their niche? And
Hmm.
um, I guess they're a lot more technology savvy than me. My kids are the same. Both in their 20s, a lot more technology savvy than me. But it's that human connection, and maybe that's something that again they need to work on for those young kids coming into the workplace. But it's very difficult. I mean, I brought in. a number of interns in Qatar Airways, people that just reached out to me on LinkedIn and said, "Hey, have you got any jobs?" And this one girl, she said, I'd reached out to over 80 people and you were the only one that ever responded. And she came into the workplace and she was unbelievable, unbelievable, really, really good. And I heard from one of the other interns that I brought in and who's now a full-time employee in my old team. She said when Sheba left, she mentioned you, the fact that you'd given her that opportunity to come in.
There you
And I think
go.
that's a nice thing to hear because, you know, over 80 people she tried to reach out to just to get an internship, right? And that's tough. That is
Yeah.
really, really tough. But hopefully she's now got some experience she can take with her to showcase to the next job. But imagine she's just one of thousands of people that are potentially looking for a role, and if you don't get the opportunity to go and show what you can do, it's going to be tough.
Yeah. 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 And just for an example, say in your last role in Qatar Airways, you obviously managed a multilingual team with um, many different
Mm.
nationalities, I assume, and different backgrounds, different
Yeah.
personalities, different languages, right? So, as a leader or as a manager of that team, how do you ensure that everybody is listened to? Or how practically, how would you ensure that everyone's voice is heard, if that makes
Mm.
sense?
Qatar Airways has got, I think, overall something like, I think it's over 150 different nationalities. It's a
Right.
crazy amount of people. My team, I had, I think, about 20 different nationalities out of 80 people. So, majority kind of Indian, subcontinent,
Mm.
guys, Sri Lanka, India, those kind of areas, but people from Africa, people from Far East, Indonesia, UK, Jamaica, Australia. Just trying to think of people,
And all in
Mexico.
different roles
Yeah,
in
all
across globally. Yeah.
yeah. But in my team, I had kind of like about 20 different nationalities in
Okay.
from a team of 80. And the corporate language is English, so
Right.
everybody has to speak English. And there were occasions where I had to remind people that talking in your native language, whilst easier, is sometimes not the best way of connecting with people. And obviously, we had local uh, Arab nations as well, so locals
Hmm.
from Qatar, from Lebanon, and Jordan, all the different nations. And I think what I really tried to do with the team was to create a psychologically safe space where people had a voice. And when I joined the organization, they'd had no leader for about 3.5, 4 years due to COVID and then the World Cup. Everybody was
Hmm.
focused on the World Cup. My
Of course.
boss
Yeah.
brought me in, and so I really encountered a team that was a little bit fractured in terms of different silos working on their own. And what I really wanted to do was bring them all together as a team. And so we had a number of initiatives that I brought in, things like lunch and learn, just to get together as a team and bring a lunch in, as in we paid for a lunch for people to come. So it's
Mhm.
if you're paying for food, people are always going to turn up, those sorts of
Absolutely.
things.
I'll be the first
Um,
one here.
Yeah, and we had my first year there. I had a conference. I held a conference for my team, and I challenged the learning partners that we had to support us. And we had people like Cornerstone on Demand, Harvard
Mhm.
Business Review, NIT, Udemy, all these different companies, LinkedIn Learning, and they all came to Doha for free. And we held a 1-day conference for my team, and they had breakout rooms and sessions and keynote speakers and all this different stuff. And I think it was just building that community of practice of people in the organization, in my part of the organization, and overall in Qatar Airways, there's probably over 250 different L&D people. So you've got a cabin crew, which is
Mhm.
separate to me, or what I was separate to, and people across the different subsidiaries. So Qatar Airways Group is more than just an airline. There are 11 or so subsidiaries: Qatar Duty Free, catering
Yeah.
company, aviation services, etc., etc. all the different parts of the organization, and a lot of them got their own learning people.
And did you work
So
across all of those subsidiaries?
Um, no. I mean, as in, they didn't report to me per se, but
Mhm.
my role was to really have a corporate strategy around
Okay.
L&D as much as possible. So I really brought them all into the fold, and we had a community of practice. And then the second year, we had complete L&D conference for all people in L&D across the organization. We had over 250 people come to the conference, and again, more people came in to help on that. And it kind of just builds a connection across the organization because there's so many people doing the same thing, but in different parts of the company that you just go, why are you doing that? We've got something, or, somebody else saying, well, why are you doing that? We've got something. And I think that worked for my team as well. And so we created this space where people could, really um, just say, look, this isn't working, or, I don't agree with what you're saying and everything else. And in the last survey that we had last year, my team had probably the highest engagement scores in the whole organization. So, the proof of the pudding is really there in the
Yeah.
eating, and that, if you allow people to have a say, allow them to have that flexibility. And I basically give them a task, we want to do this. Okay, go and do it. Here's your boundaries. Here's your parameters.
Hmm.
Um, you know, we're a safety organization. Don't want anything happening in terms of safety with the aircraft or whatever it is. And in essence, last year we won 11 Brandon Hall Awards. Brandon Hall being the kind of Oscars of the learning world, and
Hmm.
to put that into context, EY won 16, right, and they're over 400,000
Okay.
people. And I've got
Wow.
80 people in my team, so amazing, amazingly talented group of individuals, but just giving them that little bit of structure, a little bit of free reign to be creative,
And I think you're right.
really
The safe space thing, I think, is very important, that they actually felt they could answer truthfully or honestly or ask you the
yeah.
questions they need.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I come up with all these different ideas and other stuff, and they would go, "Pff, that's not going to work here because of this," and we would talk through it. Okay, well, what about this idea? Is it not going to work, and how can we make something work in this particular area? So we had a health and well-being
Yeah.
strategy within my function. I was the first function in the organisation to have a health and well-being strategy, and all these different things that was, I think, really people centric. That was the key thing. It was about looking after those guys and then making sure they're okay, because they're, a lot of my team were operationally focused, right? So they were people that would go to the international stations, so to the international airports, and train, ground handling agents, or if there was a new station opening, let's say, in Syria or somewhere like that,
Hmm.
these guys would go out and they would open the station, train the people to do the ground handling, checking people in, etc., etc. Dangerous goods, cargo, all these different
Yeah.
things. So they had a very, very important role, and they're always busy and always out and about, and I don't think they previously maybe not had that connection where they all got together, sat next to somebody that they may not, have known. And we had these, well done awards where people could nominate people for things that they'd done. And it wasn't like, oh, Gary was a good bloke in the workplace. It was like, um, this guy knew I was ill, and they came around my house and
Yeah.
said, is there anything I could do? So it was really that personal connection that was probably happening quite a lot, but not really celebrated. Didn't really have that recognition and reward for what people were doing. And I think they really took to that. They liked having that, and we had a pay it forward award and all these different things. And we were able to get vouchers from QDF,
Hmm.
for a few hundred reals, so people could go and spend a voucher at QDF shop and buy things. And it just created a nice little buzz. And I just said, how are we going to do this? How do we, get people together? What can we do? And I let them get on with it. And they came up with all these ideas. I just created a small spark. And when you let them get on with it, these
Yeah.
guys are all experts in their own area.
Yeah. 100%.
Just let them get on with it, and they can show. It's amazing what they can deliver.
Yeah. 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 And like the lunch and learns, the conferences, these are amazing things that you can do for your team. But in terms of managing multicultural teams with 20 different nationalities, right, on a daily basis, are there any small things that you can kind of do on a daily basis to help? The corporate language is English in the company, right? Are
Yeah.
there any, as a leader, what are the small things that you can do to enforce that? Enforce is a strong
Um,
word. Promote that.
yeah, I mean, knowing your team is really important, right? And going around and talking to people and connecting with people and having a coffee with people. The culture, really, I wanted to create a culture that was across the function, and and you could still see that, some of the guys from the Philippines would sit together for lunch, some of the Indian guys would sit together for lunch and whatever else. And that's just because they kind of, gravitate towards their own kind of kind, I guess. But understanding, people's pain points, connecting with them on a daily basis, and making them connect with other people.
Mhm.
So what I didn't want was, for all one nationality sitting together all the time, and recognizing other people's strengths and different parts of how they do things. And there's obviously nuances in how you have to kind of deal with people with different cultures, right? Because some cultures might be more acquiescent, and they don't want to speak up because they don't feel that they can do that. And obviously within the Middle East, you also have cultural sensitivities around females, and
Yeah, of course.
Muslim females and other things, right? So there's certain things you have to be really cognizant of and learn about whilst you're there, and that's something that you really have to learn. But once you know how to navigate that environment, I think it's like any team that you work in. The culture comes from the top, right? And so for me, it was like
Yeah,
a non-negotiable was turning up to work on time, right? You turn up to work on time. I'm an ex-military, it goes without saying.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But if you can't turn up to work on time, what do what's my expectation of you if you can't get into work? And not everybody's going to have a different thing, if they don't turn up to work. And the first thing, I would always, if I saw somebody coming in late or whatever, I'd say, hey, how's it going? Anything going on, that you arrived a bit later to work today? Do you need any help at home or whatever? And it just kind of put them on the back foot a little bit, and
Good.
it was like, if you're leading a team and you're coming in at 10 past 8 and we're meant to be in between 7 and 8, what does it say to
Of
them?
course.
You know,
Yep. Yeah.
so little things like that, I think, start from the top. And, I always kind of look at the standard you walk by as a standard you accept, right? So, people coming into work at the right time, being respectful of other people. you know, I had a few instances of, some poor behaviors that I had to really stamp out at the beginning. And that was the first 6 months were very, very tough. There was some insidious kind of networks in and around the organization that
Mhm.
people had. And, I was fighting against that. And there was this, things that went on that I had to really, work hard to stamp out. But once, people realized what I was doing and why I was doing it, and people came to me and said, hey, yeah, there is a problem here. And then it was like a pack of cards, and all of a sudden the whole pack came down. And, but once that was broached and people knew who I was and what I was trying to do, I think, to be hard but fair in the workplace, I think
Mhm.
for me, is a good thing. You've got to have a little bit of discipline in the workplace around what you do and how you do it. But they bought into it, and I think it showed in, as I say, in the engagement scores. We had the highest in HR and one of the highest in the whole company,
Mhm.
which
Mhm.
is a nice accolade for those guys in the team.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I loved that. The standard you walk by is the standard you accept. So true.
Mm.
So so
Yeah, and
true.
I think
Mhm.
if you're walking by someone that's being nasty to someone, you don't say anything, then it's
Yeah.
on me, right? I'm the leader. And the people that came into where we worked, and we worked in an amazing building, which was the Flight Deck Training Academy, where all the simulators are.
Oh yeah.
So we always had lots and lots of people in there. But I would never ever allow anybody to talk to the staff in the cafeteria. And if I was there and I heard somebody being rude to someone, I would say something, because
Yeah. Yeah.
these guys, they're not earning great money, and, they're there at providing a service. You got cleaners, and we always used to, invite the cafe staff and the cleaners, and we would invite them to the lunch and learn, and we did some presentations for them. If the cleaners were going off to get married, for example, some of the guys were going off to get married and they'd go for 2 months. we'd have a whiff round of some money and
Okay.
give them some money
Yeah.
to go with them. And I think just little things like that, just again, being human
Yeah.
in the workplace goes a long, long way because, it's a tough environment to work in. And, a lot of people are, not earning a great deal of money, even though
Hmm.
it's kind of tax free. And they've got jobs where they're just, I say just a cleaner, they're a cleaner,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean to say that you should treat them any different to anybody else that comes in the
100%.
organization, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. And in terms of looking at the future, obviously we spoke about we're living in a crazy fast paced world right now and
Mm.
everything is changing. Right. But for any kind of people leaders, HR, L&D, even team, anyone who's leading a team of people, what kind of skills do you think they're going to need in the next couple of years to be fully equipped to do their role?
Um, well, I think, as I said before, I think obviously technology is something that's coming to the forefront. So I think you have to understand technology. At this point, I don't think you need to be an expert in all of the ins and outs of
Mhm.
how things work. Personally, I don't believe that. I think this human hybrid approach, for me, I also like this kind of authenticity of being in the workplace, right, and connecting with people, having those communication skills, the creative skills, and being able to lead and manage multinational teams is
Mhm.
really important. Understanding the different nuances of the different cultures, and as leaders, we're going to have to be thinking more about things like psychological safety, health, and well-being, because you know there is so much data out there telling us that people are struggling mentally, right? Because
Yes.
technology is taking over, and is my job at risk, or all these different things, right? And so having an understanding of those things, I think, are really important. So and making sure that people have got a safe space to go. And it sounds a bit woke. I don't like the word woke, but having a safe place to go. And I created a little health and well-being room in my department, right? So we had a room specifically where you could go in and you could sit in there, and you couldn't take food and drink or your computer or anything in there or have meetings. It was just somewhere to go, and you could put a bit of music on, you could sit down, just take some time out of the day, because it's
Yeah.
quite hard to do that
Decompress.
sometimes. And I think that's, we're going to have to think more and more about how people look after themselves in the workplace, because stress and all these mental health issues are huge costs to organizations, and that's going to get even worse
Hmm.
with technology being more of a driver. And things will become faster and faster, right? Because what used to take, I don't know, 60 people to do, let's say, a pension
Yes.
calculation for every individual they work with, is going to take one automated bot to do that now.
I
And
know.
so you've got 60 people doing, what am I going to do? So I think there's a real need for people to recognize the kind of health and well-being, psychological safety, recognition and reward, the kind of human things. A lot of it is like, I don't know, maybe it's a bit like going back to school, right? When you're at school, you felt safe, you felt you could speak up, you knew you had somebody that would protect you, you knew you could do certain things,
Hmm.
and maybe, I don't know, just thinking out loud there, but for me, those are the things that are really going to matter as leaders moving forward. How
I
do you
suppose
connect with people?
for companies it's harder to measure, isn't it? The softer it's getting better, but it is definitely harder to measure and track.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
like you said, like mental health and well-being, it's definitely becoming more of a thing in companies, which is great, but it is hard to measure and track the return on investment, say, for the CFO who's questioning should this be in the should this be in the
yeah.
company, Yeah.
And you can kind of measure those things, but you've got to have the data behind it, right? So you've got
Hmm.
to have, how many people are absent at any one point in time. If
Hmm.
if you're doing something, is it reducing the absence fee, the absence rates, and can you correlate what you've done to
Yeah.
the reduction in absence rates? Is the biggest challenge, right? And so, the only way I guess you can do that is by talking to people and connecting with
Hmm.
them. And as you say, a lot of people look at it as a black and white. Well, they're back in work now, so something must have gone right. But talking to people, and they'll say, well, yeah, I felt more psychologically safe. I felt as though I could come into work, be my authentic self, and
Hmm.
all those kind of things. And I did see a lot of younger people, and we didn't have that many young people in my team per se, but I had quite a few young female, locals and, Arabs and,
Mhm.
Jordanians and, Qatari nationals and all those guys. And some of those guys were struggling, in terms of their mental health. And it was interesting to try and work out how to help them, because they also have the pressures of their country and their culture and everything
Yeah.
else that adds to the mix. So yeah, that was an interesting part of the job.
Definitely, definitely. And excuse me, one of the things we talk about actually Everywhere English as well is internal career progression and employee retention.
Mhm.
We all know how the difference between hiring externally for a new role and the swap over and the cost. Oh, there we are. And the cost of hiring, bringing people in rather than internally. So it's so important. And I don't mean keep your employees happy. I don't like that. Sounds a little bit funny, but to have them genuinely happy. And as you said, their true authentic self walking into work every day is so important. And people stay longer in companies, you know? Um,
Yeah, I totally agree. I
mm,
think yeah, being able to be yourself in the workplace, as
yeah.
long as it's not, as long as your authentic self isn't the kind of authentic self you want, in the workplace. But I think, allowing people to do that, and biggest thing that I really tried to do was, it's really difficult in the airline industry because it is all about results, but was to measure people on what they did, and not be about presenteeism. I know it sounds a bit of an oxymoron because I was talking about
Mhm.
timekeeping earlier, but I think that's about your personal standards.
Mhm.
But measuring people on what they were doing in the workplace and allowing them to get on with it. And if people have got purpose in the workplace, if people have got that reason, that raison d'etre in the workplace, right? I really want to be able to go in and create this piece of learning and everything else. They will surprise you, amazingly. And like I say, when I started at Qatar Airways in the central function, we had one management program that had just launched as I joined. When I left, we had a whole, raft of things that we'd, delivered to the organization, to the business, to different subsidiaries. And we won 11 Brand of All awards. And that was
Mhm.
not on me. I just created the environment where
Mhm.
people felt they could bring their authentic self to work and actually do the things they wanted to do. And yeah, there's some great things going to come actually in the near future. There's one program called Aviation Fundamentals that one of my guys was working on, and yeah, that's going to win a huge amount of awards. It was a really, really, really good
Mhm.
program, and a digital content program. And I'm not going to give anything away, but
Mhm.
the guys that are doing that, I'm sure will win really, really a huge amount of awards for it because it's a fantastic
Initiative.
way of looking at
Mhm.
what aviation fundamentals is. Because working in any industry, how you earn money is a really critical thing, right? And in the aviation industry, it is small margins. I can't remember the exact figure, but it's something like per seat, I don't know, $2 a seat or $5 a
Yeah, I can
seat that you're
imagine.
making
Mhm.
profit. And if you think oil price goes up by $1 a barrel is $100 million a day or something stupid. It's a huge amount of money, and so the margins are small. And if you can understand how money is made in any organization, then you've got a better chance of being able to help save money and cost save. And we made some amazing savings. One of the things we created saved over $3 million annually in terms of travel and other stuff. So
Mhm.
if you can bring that to the business, and when you're talking about that kind of thing in front of the CFO, that makes a massive difference.
100%. That's funny now you said that because only last night on telly I was watching Michael Ryanair. He was doing an
Yeah.
interview on telly, on Irish telly, about profits and the airlines and the oil and everything like that. So he's a gas character. Yeah, but it was
Mm.
good. It was good. But you're right. But you are right about being able to show the CFO you can cost save a little bit. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, Gary, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. Um, what I took away from that mostly for me, and it's something that we completely value in Everywhere English as well, is the three words there: people connection, human hybrid approach, social species. And I think that's something that we really, really have to remember and hold on to in this crazy world, and integrate into our strategies and integrate into our learnings and integrate into our roles and not forget about it.
Yeah.
That's for me. That's what I took away there now. Thanks a million, Gary. Thanks for coming on.
Welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me.
That brings us to the end of this episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like and subscribe. You can also find more episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you the next time.